So this evening is about whether it's a smooth future, everything gradually changes, we gradually adjust, or whether it's a disruptive future, whether things dramatically happen and we'll have to be ready for them, like it or not. And if you look back at history, my own personal history, I'm probably older than most people in this room. Yeah. When I was born, we had no phone in the house. We had no TV. We had no loo paper. We had, like everyone else, we had strips of newspaper. There had never been a car in my family ever, in the whole of the Williams history. And there was certainly no computers, although they kind of just existed. When I started the science show in 1975, there were no ATMs, there were no mobile phones, which I don't have, of course, even now. There were no CDs, there were no DVDs, there were no laptops, there was no colour television, although that was very close. There was no AIDS, and there was certainly no internet. Tell that to someone under 20 today, and they can't believe that the world was such. My friends here have got a little list to tantalise you with of, for instance, what didn't exist in 1975. I'll whip through it very quickly, see if you can guess. What didn't exist in 75? Silicon solar cells, concerns about peak oil, LCD screens, barcodes, surely they didn't exist then. Limits to growth thesis, the first Apple computer. Which of those did not exist in 75? And the answer is the first Apple computer, which is 76. The rest, solar cells, 54, peak oil, 56, LCD screen, 72, barcode, 74. That was surprising. And limits to growth, of course, 72. What didn't exist in 95 out of the Pentium processor, the Bluetooth, Net Space Navigator, World Wide Web, and Viagra? Why is Viagra funny? I think it's a wonderful invention. The thing that was so marvellous about it is it was developed as a treatment for some sort of heart ailment, and then it moved sideways, or down, if you like. What didn't exist in 95? And the answer is Viagra. What didn't exist in 2005? And the answer, out of Wikipedia, YouTube, WikiLeaks, and Google. What didn't exist in 2005? And the answer is WikiLeaks. Now, even that small list makes you wonder about memory and how you notice change happen. Many of those things so recent. Two quotations from some of the press this week about such things. One of them, now you must remember that I work for the ABC and therefore I have no opinions of my own. And so I'm just looking at those things which, with very recent treatment, are possible disruptors. And this is from The Economist, which was published on Monday, page 83 if you want to look at it. And it's about climate change. And the opening paragraph goes like this: everyone knows what must be done about climate change, but no one is doing anything about it. More than 2 decades of speeches and summitry have failed to thin out emissions of greenhouse gases. In fact, emissions are accelerating. 1/4 of all the carbon dioxide ever pumped into the air by humans was put there in the decade between 2000 and 2010. It'll hang around for centuries, meaning that the future is sure to be hotter, even if all greenhouse gas emissions cease overnight. The official ambition of limiting the global temperature rise to 2 degrees C looks increasingly like a bad joke. I have to remind you that was from The Economist, not the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. If you were to look at, on the other hand, the Financial Review, the Chanticleer column, about innovation, you know, inventing things like that list that we had before, it says our embarrassing innovation score. A couple of paragraphs. Australia's latest report card on innovation on mining, manufacturing and services will give Industry Minister Ian Macfarlane reason to pause before slashing key programs introduced by the former government. The 4th edition of the Australian Innovation System report contains grim news for those who think the transition from a mining-based economy to a knowledge-based one will be seamless or easy. It shows industry is insular and disconnected from global supply chains at a time when collaborative efforts in research and development are critical to productivity. Australia ranks second last out of the 26 countries in the OECD in terms of innovators who engage in international collaborative innovation, and 12th out of 26 countries on domestic collaboration on innovation. The report says these results reinforce the relatively low levels of international engagement on foreign investment in business in R&D. Well, you can see a sort of trend, a certain context. Are we preparing for the future, or are we kind of stumbling towards it? Is it going to hit us somewhere in the kneecaps? The people who will help us decide what the future is and how you might respond to some of the ideas will come and join me on stage, please. Now, they are Bjorn Lomborg, John Duschinsky from Canada, Peggy Liu from China, Scott Anthony from Singapore via the United States, and Jason Drew from South Africa. Thank you. Be seated, and I'll ask you one by one to stand up and say first a few minutes about where you stand on the future and how we get there. And after each has done that, we'll have a bit of interplay, and then I will dive in amongst you and ask you to put short, sharp questions, saying who you are, and to continue the conversation till just after 8, when we'll have a bit of supper, and then we'll continue after that. First of all, I will ask Bjorn Lomborg to stand up, environmentalist, author of Cool It and The Skeptical Environmentalist, which was well received by The Economist, if you remember, director of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank. He researches smart ways to improve the environment and the world, was named one of the world's 100 most influential people by Time magazine, and is an adjunct professor at the Copenhagen Business School. Bjorn Lomborg, please.
Hey, Robyn, thank you. We only have 4 minutes to talk about all of the future, so I'm just going to make it very brief. I've just finished, together with 21 of the world's top economists, to look at the world from 1900 to 2050, looking at a lot of different areas. And it's important. One of the things that economists can bring along is both stop looking just at these trendy little stories. It's very easy to get absorbed in a specific story, and also get a sense of the magnitude of these issues. And we're going to talk about, are things disruptive? Are change disruptive? Or is it actually very gradual? I think we often overestimate, and I'm going to probably make the slightly controversial argument here, that most things are actually very, very gradual. If you think about one of the biggest inventions, certainly in the last couple hundred years, it's probably electrification. It's a great idea. It's not something we think about because we are all electrified, but there's still 1.25 billion people who don't have access to electricity, 125 years after it became available in many US and European cities. So fundamentally, it doesn't happen overnight, even if it's very, very disruptive. Take a look, for instance, at shale gas, which in the US is probably the most disruptive energy technology that we've seen for a very long time. Has it disrupted your lives? Yes, we've gotten slightly cheaper gas. That's great for many different reasons, but it's not disrupting our lives. We have this idea that the future is going to disrupt our lives. No, it's going to change it, and it's going to change it for the better. Just to give you a couple of very, very brief overviews, remember, for instance, in health, in 1900, the average person lived to be 32 years of age. In 2050, we'll be 76 on average. You will have gained more than 2 lifetimes. And remember, every month you live, you'll actually get an extra week in expected lifetime. That's pretty amazing. Also, we looked at gender inequality. One of the things I think we totally forget, it's a huge loss, in a sense, that in 1900, only 15% of all people in the workforce were women. Today, it's 40% in the world. And even by 2050, it'll only be 45%. We're still not at equality, even in 2050. Let me just briefly give you two other ideas on environment. This is one of the things I work a lot on. We looked at what's the problem with global warming. Obviously, a lot of people think global warming is probably the biggest environmental problem. Well, if you look at it compared to another environmental problem I'm going to speak about just in a second, it's not. Global warming is probably actually, and a little surprisingly, we ran the economic models, a net benefit. That's probably not what you would have thought. But that's because we listen to all the bad stories, many of which are real. But we forget to hear all the good stories, mostly that CO2 is a fertilizer and actually increase agricultural output now. Global warming is going to be a problem in the long run. That's why we should deal with it. But it's actually a benefit, only about 1% of GDP right now. What is a big environmental problem is air pollution. And it's probably not even the air pollution you think about, the outdoor air pollution. It's the fact that about 3 billion people, almost half this world's population, live with indoor air pollution. They burn twigs and dung and cardboard to keep warm and cook. And that actually kills 3.5 million people. We estimate that that's one of the biggest problems in the world. It's probably the second and third largest problem in the world. And that is also going down because more people get richer and actually get better off. But it's not going to be a disruptive process. It's going to be a gradual process. But fundamentally, let's get our proportion right, and let's remember the future is actually going to be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Bjorn. Next, Duschinsky from Canada. He's a social innovator, global cage rattler, it says here.
It does.
And change agent, author of Me-volution. You thrive by constantly looking at the world around you and thinking about it and using these observations to drive new and creative thinking, breaking down silos and challenging the status quo. Please,
Thank you,
change
sir.
it for us.
Good evening, folks. Race to the future, or not? What if we stopped racing? If you look at some of the big issues that we face in the world today, and there's lots of them, we've not really made a huge amount of headway on them. People look to philanthropy as a source of money to drive solutions to change the world. Philanthropy represented 2% of GDP in the 1960s, and it still represents 2% of GDP today, even after the Gates and the Buffetts. 98% of the world's capital is not being used for social good. But that's a money conversation. I'm actually quite optimistic. I have to be. The reason I'm optimistic is that I think we're beginning to realize that money doesn't solve problems, it makes them worse. And that the reaction that we have had over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years to some of the big problems of the world is to throw money at them. What we're realizing is that when you throw money at a problem, you stop looking at the problem and you start focusing on the symptoms. Specifically, you focus on how can I get the best bang for my buck by alleviating as many symptoms as I possibly can in a way that's going to keep my stakeholders happy. We take the focus off the problem and we start focusing on the symptoms. It becomes a kind of bang for your buck Band-Aid culture. But I think we're beginning to realize now that we solve problems with people, and we solve problems with creativity. So race to the future for me, no, I don't want to race to the future. I want people to stop throwing money at problems, and to start really trying to understand what these problems are. Because when you truly understand what the problems are, then you can apply creativity to them. And when you apply creativity to a problem, you can help people see the problem in a slightly different way. Just a couple of degrees left or right. And by doing that, you can give people things to talk about. And the more people see a problem in a different way, the more people talk about the problem. And the more people talk about the problem, the bigger the conversation around the problem becomes. And the bigger the conversation around the problem, the easier it is to solve. Because if you think about all of the big big, profound changes that we've seen in our societies over the last 100 years, you can pretty much attach the word movement to the end of all of them. So race to the future, only if it's driven by people and if it's driven by creativity. Thank you.
Thank you. Which couple of problems would you like to start with?
Oh, we've got climate change to my right, and I'm sure we've got a couple more to my left.
You won't pick one?
I'm happy. Yeah, which one would you like to pick? You get to be the moderator. You can
No,
pick the problem.
no, it's up to you. You choose one.
Well, we could choose any of the big diseases that are out there.
Right.
We could choose Alzheimer's disease. We could choose Parkinson's disease. We talked this afternoon quite a lot about motor neuron disease.
Yeah.
Any of those big diseases, throwing money at them is not the solution.
It's interesting that Paul Davis, who's actually an astrophysicist, has been called in by the cancer people in the United States to do a completely new analysis of how the system works. And he's come up with some fantastic stuff. Anyway, next speaker, Peggy Liu, who's chairperson of JUICE, international sustainability expert on greening China, internationally recognized for her expertise on China's sustainability landscape, Time magazine Hero of the Environment, a Forbes Woman to Watch in Asia, named a China Top 50 Innovative Business Leader by China Business News Weekly. Please talk to us.
Thank you. Hello, Melbourne from Shanghai. I'm so glad to be here and wanted to start by telling you how much I love the future. I grew up reading sci-fi, and when I applied to MIT, I wrote about how Isaac Asimov had inspired me to go there and learn about how to build robots. So I personally have been running fast towards the future. And I've been really lucky in that I've been living through two huge leaps in huge changes in human history. One is the internet, and the second one is clean energy and sustainability. During the 90s, that decade, I lived in Silicon Valley, and unfortunately I'm going to expose how old I am, but I was the product manager for the first software product that allowed you to with a graphical user interface, surf the internet. This was just before actually the web came out. And that decade was a huge amount of change. It was new business models, new money, new entrepreneurs, some new buildings, new money, definitely, new people. And for me, I really thrived because I view change as business opportunity. About 9 years ago, I moved with my husband to start a venture fund in Shanghai, where I live now. And since then, I started an NGO called JUICE, where we're working on sustainable urbanization, sustainable consumption, the grid. And I have to tell you, the amount of change there is just like Silicon Valley, except multiply it by 100,000 times. So it's the culture, all that stuff that I talked about, but it's also the new buildings, the new roads that we drive on, the new subways, the new culture, how we dress, what we eat, how we eat, the language, and also the technology. Just in the last few years, let's say the last 3 years, a technology called Weixin came out, which has fundamentally changed the way that we communicate as mothers, as parents, as business people, and in social media networks. Fundamentally rocked China's world. So I see change very, very clearly, that it is exponential and it's not going to stop, and we should just welcome it. However, I'm going to talk about innovation, that there's 3 different types of innovation. One is technology. I just talked a little bit about that, the internet, for example. 2 is the markets, so how our desire transforms. And in China, I'll just give you an example. In the last 15 years, we've really started to adopt drinking milk. We're starting to eat salads, raw, leafy vegetables. We're starting to eat hamburgers, which my uncle and aunts, when they moved to the US from China, was like, what is this crap? Right? So really, really rapid change in desire, mainly because we're drip-fed candied images by TV shows and ads. So we can transform desire very, very rapidly. In fact, that's what we're doing with the China Dream, trying to move away from the American Dream, conspicuous consumption, and towards a more culturally relevant Chinese dream about safe food, air, and water, vibrant living, livable communities, and opportunities to move ahead. So, but the third thing in innovation is the links between people and institutions. And I think this is where we have failed as a society to change, to improve, to progress. And I think that in the next generation of growth, we're going to have to do things that really create much more labor productivity, that bring energy intensity, resource efficiency, and this is going to require cross-sector, cross-border collaboration in a way that we don't do today. To respond to the global financial crisis, to respond to disasters, to respond to any of the nexus issues that are the global issues of today, we're going to have to learn how to talk together productively across sectors, across borders. And so I invite you to take a look at stonesoupleaders.org, named after the famous fable. stonesoupleaders.org is about a new global collaborative leadership model that teaches people methodically how to do this and takes examples from all over the world, Prince Haakon from Norway about global dignity, to Christian Reichenberger, formerly of National Geographic, about ocean reserves, to Mina Guli talking about thirst, to Felix Madriaga from Nicaragua talking about civil rights. And I think that this is the one area where I'm a little bit more pessimistic. But I think that these types of conferences like CI is what's necessary to start the dialogue about how we can more methodically work together and have positive collisions and conversations about collaboration. Thank you.
Peggy, very exciting. Do people where you work have an idea of what kind of society they would like to see, or is it just a case of innovating and innovating here, innovating somewhere else, and things just happen? Or are you building towards something?
Well, we are all building towards models that we grasp at, like eco-cities or the new China dream. Right now, there's a huge national conversation about what does this China dream look like. Our organization would like to articulate it as being able to take safe food, air, and water for granted. I know you do that every day, but for me, I have a river that has 18,000 pigs floating down it during a month, or 22 tons of beef. That's not beef, but pork and paraffin. I have a cough because of the pollution. We want livable communities like Melbourne. We want a city that's voted most livable city one day. We like social spaces. We don't have social spaces. We've been designing for phallic symbols and highways and factory boxes, but we have no human-scale social spaces. And we'd love vibrant living. We'd like to, have a society where our kids go out and play versus just study, study, study to get into college. We'd like to have our aging society be able to go out and enjoy retirement. And we all want a life that is maybe a little bit hard to imagine, but maybe we have passports. Maybe we're able to move from city to city and our benefits transfer along with us. Yeah. We want opportunities like everybody here.
Isn't it interesting? I was stunned in 1995 in Beijing to hear Madame Nan Deng, who was Minister of the Environment, say, and Deng Xiaoping's daughter, say that, okay, we've got 12% growth, which is fantastic, but we've got 8% of that as a cost environmentally, leaving us with only 4%. So remember the difference.
I think the question is, what good is growth if China's not livable?
Indeed. I think it goes for most people as well. Scott Anthony from Singapore, actually via the United States, strategic transformation and disruptive innovation expert, managing partner InnoSight. He's the managing partner of the organization, which is a boutique consulting and investment company, focuses on strategic transformation, disruptive change, and business model innovation. Please talk to us.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm going to make 4 points, and I'll tell you what they are, just so you can hopefully remember at least a couple of them. I'm going to talk about Paul Valery. I'm going to talk about Ray Amara. I'm going to talk about Andy Dufresne, and I'm going to talk about aliens. So those are my 4 points to make. First, Paul Valery, great French poet, once said, "The trouble with our times is that the future is not what it used to be." He said that 70 years ago. The statement has never been more true. The reality is change is happening more quickly than it ever did before. It absolutely did take 120 years for electricity to spread, and it's still not available in many parts of the world. But Facebook is less than 10 years old, and there are 1 billion members on it. I was visiting a woman in her home in the Philippines. She lives on about $1 per day. She has no electricity. She has no running water. She's on Facebook. The world is changing more quickly than it ever did before. In the face of this, we get to the second name, Ray Amara, former president of the Institute for the Future, coined what's known as Amara's Law. We always tend to overestimate the impact of change in the short term and underestimate the impact of that change in the long term. Put those two things together and think for just a second. We're in a world that is changing more rapidly than it ever did before. New technologies being born and being spread across the globe in the blink of an eye. We might overestimate what happens in the near term, but in the long term, we're probably underestimating how different our world will be. I think about this from the frame of a parent. I've got 3 children who are 8, 6, and 2 years old. I look at my 2-year-old and I think of the kind of world he's going to grow up in and what it's going to be like when he's my age. And I realize there's very little I can do to teach him because the things that he's going to have to learn, the things that he's going to have to do, the skills he's going to have to develop, they'll be completely different. The technologies will be different. The way the world works will be completely different. Innovation is transforming everything. The way that we work, live, play, communicate, act as parents and members of our community. This gets to my third point then, Andy Dufresne. Anyone recognize that name, where that's from? Shawshank Redemption, fantastic movie. I'm on a lot of very long plane trips, so I've seen just about every movie that's relatively recent. So sometimes you go back to the classics. This was on a recent trip that I took to Istanbul for a day. That's a different story. So I'm watching the Shawshank Redemption, and the reason why I mention this movie and this character is because when we're faced with all of this change, it's very easy to get paralyzed. It's very easy for us to say it's too much. We can't handle it. We're just going to pull back. We're going to slow down. We're going to drop out. You remember that iconic scene? Andy has just been in solitary confinement for 2 months. The person who could exonerate him, could get him out of jail, had been killed by the evil warden. He's there talking to his friend Red, and he's still hopeful, Dufresne is. He still believes in the future. And Red basically says, how is that possible? And Andy says, the way I see it, you've got a choice. Get busy living or get busy dying. In the face of all of this change, it can be overwhelming. But the genie does not go back in the bottle. That is the choice that we all face. Get busy living or get busy dying. Aliens. I have no idea if they exist. I have no idea if they're landing by 2050. That's not my point. My point is how you can begin as an individual to get ready. This goes a little bit to what is meant to happen at this conference. This conference is about collisions. It's about bringing together different mindsets, different approaches, different ways of thinking. We're taught historically to network with the people who look like us, who act like us, who went to our schools, who have the same background as us. You can't do that if you're getting ready for discontinuous change. You need to network with people who look, think, and act differently than you. First piece of advice, go find an alien. If you're in a large company, they exist. They're the people who sit at the fringes of meetings. They're the people who make kind of weird comments. They're the people that everybody shuns. Hug your aliens. Find a lot of them because they'll begin to give you the insights and the skills to prepare for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bjorn, do you disagree with what you just heard about the rapid change that Anthony said?
No, I think there's lots of rapid change. I don't think that's the issue, but I think we tend to over-focus on the dramatic change. I'm sure this woman's life has been changed by the fact that she's on Facebook, but I think it's probably still much more important to her what the price of rice is and whether she has good, clean drinking water. And those are, again, problems that are 100 or many more years old. So in some sense, it's very easy to say, yes, we got DVD recorders faster and we got cell phone reception much faster than we got TVs, all that stuff. But in actual fact, the things that I think really matter to most people most of the time takes a lot longer, and they're not disruptive as much as incremental.
Jason was here last time. I had a great spell listening to your worms. I thought the worms are really an inspiration, and you were on television, on radio. Not talking to me quite yet. We'll catch up with that at some, but some of the ideas were just extraordinary. From South Africa, serial entrepreneur. Serial entrepreneur, that's interesting. business leader, eco-entrepreneur and author, former CEO of a JSE-listed business. You chair a number of organizations, including agriprotein.com, and your latest green venture, that's your latest green venture, and you're author of The Protein Crunch. You're not crunching on worms, are you?
Well,
You are, maybe.
We'll be in the future.
Let's talk to us.
So, how do I see the future? I think it could not be clearer that the Industrial Revolution is over and finished. Our whole models of that are finished. And we're heading straight into the sustainability revolution. It's not optional, it's happening around us today. Every single bit of every single facet of your life is currently being reinvented. From the foods you eat, to the technologies you use, to the social interactions that you have. Everything is going to change, and it's going to change at a pace far, far quicker than maybe is comfortable for us. Why? Because we live in an increasingly resource-constrained world, and if we are not to be defined by that constraint of resource, we've got to get some change happening. And change is going to be so different to that which it was in the past. Because from where I stand, our future is fairly broken. You know, we talk about cities where you can't breathe and eat. We talk about whole communities excluded from the sort of things that we take for granted. The poor, 3/4 of this world probably, one way or another. So we have to get and reinvent our new future. It's like the beginning of the Renaissance. It can and should spark the most extraordinary creativity amongst humanity. In order to get to that position of creativity, we need to lighten up a bit. We need to get less serious about making our quarterly numbers and more serious about fixing the future. There's enough creativity on this planet to fix all the problems we have. But we need to understand, to go back to somebody else said earlier, what the problems really are. It's not about making your quarterly numbers. It's not about making more and more rapid economic growth. It's about getting to a state where we find a new way of being as humans, that we can share this planet more equitably between the 9 billion of us and still have businesses that enable us to get on and have productive and fulfilling lives. I think that the outcome of humanity will be defined by 2030. We've got 15 years to work it out 3 things. In the past, it was always how and what. I'm going to be a billionaire by creating a new thing in Silicon Valley. And I think the future is very much about why. Why am I going to do things? In a very, very choppy and tumultuous world, which this revolution will be, you need to stand for something. You need to have some clear vision. Because if you don't stand for something, you're liable to fall for anything. Thank you.